So today I am joined again by my friend Alistair McBride. Al, you're here to have a conversation with me about some of my best advice for building authority, and this is actually data based rather than kind of just opinion. So I want to talk to you about some stuff that I've shown you very briefly just beforehand, and we're going to kind of dig into the insights and data a little bit from this.
Absolutely, yeah, no, really interested in this one because, as you said, this is, as I understand it, the transcripts of what, 100 and something, 162 odd episodes
Yeah.
analyzed with various AI tools, extracting what are the common themes, what are the common principles that keep popping up through all of these thought leaders that you've interviewed over the last 18 months, 2 years odd, maybe more, and so that we can see what people are saying, what all these industry leading experts are actually agreeing on. Is that correct? Is that where am I in the right ballpark?
Yeah, so if there's one episode of the Recognized Authority that you have to listen to, it's this one because basically what we're going to do is we're going to run down through literally the best advice from all of these super smart people who I've spoken with, and I've been very lucky to speak with over 150 experts. The numbers don't quite correlate because I've done some solo episodes. I've had some people come on for more than one episode, so I'd say this is the collation of advice from about 150 best-selling authors, thought leaders, super smart people. And so what I've done is I've taken all of the episodes. This is the nice thing about having a big data set, like 200 hours of podcast audio, and I was able to
Right.
transcribe all of those. I took the transcriptions, pulled out all the key insights and advice from every episode, and then I processed that again with AI to sort it and collate it and figure out like what's the frequency of the advice that's come up, what advice are we hearing over and over and over again. And so what we're going to do is I actually have the top 28 pieces of advice. I'm not going to go through them all one by one with you, but we're going to go through, kind of highlight some of the really important stuff. And we're going to, towards the end of this episode, what we're going to do is we're going to talk like what are the top five pieces of advice that we're seeing. And like some of these are very high in frequency. Like there's one piece of advice that's been given at least 90 times. So that's 90 different people emphasizing this particular piece of advice. So we're going to go through that.
Great
So
stuff.
what I'll do is I'm going to share my screen, and if you're listening to this on audio, you can find the spreadsheet because I've got this as a spreadsheet, of course. You can find a link to download and to view that. And I will be putting that with the link in the show notes. And yeah, Al, so what I'd like to do is just get your reaction to this and talk through some of those things. So I'm
Let's
going to
go
do a
for it.
screen share
So,
here.
do the screen share there. I mean, I've just literally been shown this about 5 minutes ago, so it is quite interesting. Um, I'm first of all interested in the different categories. Did you set those, or were those categories themselves picked out by the
So
AI
what
analyst?
Yeah, so what I did was I used and by the way I used Google's Gemini Pro 1.5 for a lot of this because it has this enormous window which you can give it a lot more data. So I used that to process a
Interesting.
lot of this. So we
Okay.
came up with these categories, and I was working quite a bit back and forth with the AI to come up with these categories to try and make them logical. The high level categories, and this is kind of like the top I think five categories. The first one is branding and positioning. Second is content creation and distribution. Third is engagement and relationships. Fourth is professional development and mindset. And the fifth is value and impact. And there's a bit about pricing and focusing on creating value in there. So,
Right.
yeah,
Excellent.
so where do you
So,
think would be a good place to
well, we'll
start with this?
start at the start where it's talking about branding and positioning, and we'll have a chat through that. Some of these numbers are huge. You know,
Hmm.
89 of your 150 odd guests talk distinctly and overtly about the importance of building authority. I mean, okay, they're on your podcast called the Recognized Authority, but still, it's very much was a theme that they very much got behind.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, this is the whole theme of the podcast. This is your whole raison d'être, if you want. Can you talk about further? Well, can you give us a few more insights on that?
Yeah,
Particularly,
well,
maybe
I think
in connected to the second one, which is the importance of specializing and niching down, which is what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I knew this one was going to come up because, like, I know just from experiencing the conversations that it comes up so often. So I think people talk a lot about building authority because, it is the premise of the show, and I brought on people who, who believe in that. But I think why it's important is because if you can establish yourself as the go-to person, as a recognized authority, you are going to have increased trust, credibility in sales. So you're going to have more people coming to you. Those people, when they come to you, they're going to believe in your credibility, and they're not going to be quibbling about price. You're going to be able to command higher fees. You're going to have inbound leads, which means that you're going to have more. That you're going to have when you've got more inbound leads coming in, you can be more picky and choosy about the clients you decide to work with. So you can decide to work with the clients who you prefer to work with, and usually what that means is that you have more free time as well. So there's so many different benefits that come from that. The best one for me is the ability to turn away bad fit clients. That's the number one thing. It's something I always hated having to do.
Yeah. Is the dream. And just to say on that specialised niching down, and we can talk about it again, but I have to report, even just last night I was talking to a friend of mine. I have a book coming out here that Mr. McDermott here is, as a good friend, has been excellent at helping me edit it as part of Authority Press. But what's important is this, is that I just mentioned it to someone. They didn't even read it yet. And you have the next updated proof there. But they didn't even read it yet. And they're already going, you need to talk to this person. Let me introduce you to that person. So from this individual's current job, right, she is thinking of bringing me into her team, into the wider company then from there. She's introducing me to people in her previous role in a different company, and potentially getting me on the speaker circuit, all of this different stuff. This is literally inbound. She's sending these emails to introduce me to these things in the next couple of days. So this is all from the authority, for example, in this case of having a book, but it equally could be from just being that authority. This is inbound, live as an example of what we're talking about. I actually couldn't believe how forthcoming she was. I didn't even ask for this stuff. She's just, what are we up to? Oh, I've just finished publishing a book. It's about to go live. And this conversation rolled out. It was kind of breathtaking, actually. So I have to say, this is very much proof in the pudding. It is very cool.
This is one of the things, and I think it's one of those things about having a book. I mean, literally we have the phrase, he wrote the book on it, she wrote the book on it, as this indicator of being the go-to expert. And what you're seeing there is somebody sees that you've got a book, and they know what the topic is, but they don't even bother to read it. They haven't gone through the process of reading it, and they're able to say, okay, there's a certain level of legitimacy, credibility. Now you already have some trust built up with them, but and the book isn't
a bit, But it's you're talking about niching, right? I'm not a coach. I'm a negotiation communication coach. So niche down, expertise. It's not any old book on negotiation. It's the psychological side. So people who have their 10,000 or people who are new to it are going, oh yeah, there's loads of the psychology stuff applied to it that I don't really get, that I'm missing a lot of this. Yes, this is what I need. That's the niche we're talking about. That's that niche benefit right there. Anyway, sorry, I'm waxing on here, but it was kind of mind-blowing how I didn't even have to ask for leads. I didn't have none of the sales stuff, They're just like, oh, that's brilliant. Oh, and all these ideas flowing from them, unprompted.
Yeah. So this is like what we're talking about here is we're talking about the number 2 piece of advice in the branding and positioning category is to niche down. And that's come up at least 65 times. So approximately 1 in every 3 episodes, my guest talks about the importance of niching down. And I this just comes up over and over and over again. And I don't even, I don't prep people for it. I am interested in what people say about this, but most of the time they say it unsolicited that, they think that it's super important. And it's just, it comes back to this for me. If you want to be the recognized authority in your field, then you have to choose your field. And that sounds really logical and clear. But a lot of people don't choose a field. They want to float in this kind of more generalist position. And I understand that too. I understand why people want to do that, because you feel like you're more adaptable. You're working in many, many different problem areas. But the problem is you don't develop this deep expertise, and you don't develop this reputation as being an expert in one single field. So, and that's why it's come up so often on the podcast.
And as you see, just from this, then the next points down, develop a strong point of view, and have a clear positioning statement. They kind of flow from that niching down in the first place. That if you're niching down, you usually have particular viewpoints or opinions in that. And of course, that's very much what came across with mine. That compassion, human interaction can be a huge part of negotiation in a balanced way, not leaving yourself overly vulnerable, but building that extra trust. Basically, trust leads to huge value add. It's part of my positioning statement. So I'm loving the way that's flowing right from there. And as I said, it's just proof in the pudding, as a lovely example just from literally last night. So let's move on then into the content creation and distribution, because this is kind of a big thing that you're talking about. You need to actually use your voice in some media, whether it's video, whether it's podcast, whether writing a book, whether you're blogging. You need to actually get your thoughts down and then thoughts out there, right? So 90 people, over 90 people, said to create content consistently. So first of all, there's 2 points there I'd love to raise to everyone. One is to create content, right? And then to create content consistently. Mm-hmm. Why do you think the consistency matters?
So
or is that a silly
there's
question?
a couple of different parts to it. And by the way, in this particular subsection of content creation and distribution, there's one huge piece of advice, and then everything else is kind of supporting to it. So this one is stand out, that creating content consistently is so important, and it's the consistency that is crucial, because there's 2 factors. That first off, you're creating more content. So when you're creating more content, you get better at it, because when you start out, you're probably going to suck. I'm sorry, but that's probably the case. The first YouTube video you make, the first blog post you write, it's not going to be great. Unless you've been, unless you've been doing something, unless you're in video, in video production already as an industry, or unless you're already specialized as a writer, you probably won't come out the gate with something brilliant. And so what you need to do is, just like going to the gym, you need to build up your publishing muscles, your writing muscles. You've got to figure out how to do all the things that you want to do with video. It could be to do with how you set up your camera, getting closer to the microphone, right. What you're putting in your scripts, having better call to action. There's so many little details, and particularly with video, but there are so many details in all of this. And that's one of the things that came across from a lot of the interviews that I did, is there's so much nuance that when we're not specialists in an area, when we haven't got a lot of experience, we don't see all the nuance, all behind the scenes, what's going on. Like, the way I think about it, it's a bit like if you're watching the 100 meters final at the Olympics. Every little detail, from how they place their feet, how they put their fingers on the ground before they start running, the way that they hold their hands, every little detail. Sometimes we look at it and we see, okay, that's somebody running fast, but there's so much more to it. Like, there's all those little details that have gone into, years of prep to that point. And it's very similar when it comes, like when I talk to people, for example, about YouTube, and I've spoken to Cyan Cooper recently about that, and just the detail and the nuance. I was talking to David Newman about sales conversations, and again, the detail and the nuance in what he's doing and how he's prepping and the way that he words the conversation, all of that is fine-tuned over time. And so this is just applying that same thing to creating content. You have to create content regularly over time, create a volume of it, and a major part of that is just to get better at it. The other part is you're creating this body of work which is out in the world, helping people discover you. So it's creating a bigger surface area. So what's happening is, I've got 170 odd episodes of the podcast. Tons of those are on YouTube. People can discover those on YouTube. People might find them through search engine optimization. They might do a search on Twitter or LinkedIn, and they might come across one of those. So
Sure.
you're creating this mass of content, which is getting better and better in quality, and is sitting out there for people to stumble across and find you and say, "Hey, I'm interested in what this person has to say." So
Well,
you've
the
got
other
this
thing
big
is,
surface area.
yeah, big surface area is absolutely key. The other thing is it's a soft, gentle, and value add way to be relatively top of mind to a lot of people. So if you're
Hmm.
publishing on, say, LinkedIn, amongst other places, on a weekly basis or almost a daily basis, so you've one episode and maybe then you have a pull quote like I have for my episodes, or a wee clip that you put up, or again mentioning something about the speaker, all of these sort of things which direct people's attention, because people aren't on it every day, and if they are, they're not going to see your posts. But when you're there regularly with something of value to offer, that's what you get known for. You're that person. You're the such and such guy, or the certain such and such gal. That's what you are then associated in people's head with your niche, because you're continually publishing, which is again that very soft value add kind of way of being, which is super. So that's very good. And as you said, down in the second, now it's a bit of a distant second, use podcasting to build authority, because it allows you to do that very well. So should we pop
Hmm.
on down to the next section then? So
Yeah,
engagement and
I want to,
relationships.
I want
Oh,
to briefly
okay,
just
even
talk about those sections, those other
yeah.
pieces of advice around content creation. So that they are use podcasting to build authority, repurpose content, use video marketing, use storytelling. Now, storytelling, I probably haven't had enough people on the podcast who've been talking about that. I do think it is very important. Using video marketing and using podcasting, I think that they're just two channels that I think, or two media that are really important to get good at using video and using podcasting. I think it's actually going to be more and more important now with this kind of dawn of AI generated content, that we're actually using video content and making video ourselves, because I think that's going to help us to stand out. But that's a whole different conversation.
It is a
So,
whole different
but
conversation, but just to touch on that about the repurposing content as well, is that people think, well, I don't have all the time in the week to be doing this stuff. And the beauty,
mhm.
as you said, of doing something like a podcast or writing a book, if you have a book, that's like what, 60 different blog posts right there, and I haven't even read the book. That's a whole
Yeah,
year's worth of content that you could potentially put out in different formats. As you said, doing either the video marketing or the podcast, it's video and audio. And you can make blog posts out of it, you can make clips, as we said, you can do all these sort of things. So it's being able to very quickly, once you have the one thing, being able to disseminate that into multiple different channels, so different people can find you on their more preferred platform or more preferred way.
yeah. And one of the things I think that's important here is you just need to create the content one time.
Exactly.
And then we have AI assistive tools that can help to repurpose. And you can hire people, you can outsource and delegate. You can have somebody on your internal team. You can hire, there are VAs and companies that do this professionally. And so for me, this is why I think that doing stuff on video is important. And that's why we're recording video now, even though this is primarily an audio podcast.
Sure.
But the reason why I want to do the video is because you can repurpose video in more different ways. And so, for example, so when we have this, we can take this video, we can put it straight up on YouTube as a self-contained video. Then we can also cut snippets out, so cut these short videos out. We can also take the transcript of the video, we can take the audio of the video, put it out as a podcast. We can take the transcript of the video and we can process that with AI tools and turn that into a blog post. We can turn that
LinkedIn
into,
article. Yeah.
LinkedIn posts. We can turn that into a carousel document on LinkedIn. There's all sorts of things that you can do once you've got the original source. And you, as the expert, don't need to be present for that repurposing. Once you have shown people what it is that you want created from that, or once you set up the correct prompts and the correct workflow in AI, you can create these things. And that's what's really cool about, you create your original piece of content and then everything else comes from that. I think that people think I spend a huge amount of time creating content because they see the amount of content that I'm publishing. But actually, I'm only spending 1 or 2 hours per week. And that's I just show up and do a podcast interview, and then everything else is taken care of for me. and I think that's really crucial because you're not spending huge amounts of time here. So I have a book called Efficient Content Creation. It's up on Amazon. It's either free or it's 99 cents or something like that. So go check that out. You might find it interesting. But it talks
Excellent.
about the actual workflow and the tools that I use to do this. So you might find that interesting.
Very good, very good. So, we're ready to move on to the next exciting section.
Yeah, let's talk. So the next section is engagement and relationships. And so this is talking about understanding your clients, and it's also talking about, you know, your audience, the people who you're connected with on LinkedIn, relationships with all of those people. Because even though we want to build authority and be seen as a thought leader, the human connection here, just like with your book, the human connection is the crucial piece of the equation. And so the number one piece of advice that stand out in this section is understand your ideal client.
Absolutely key, because otherwise they don't feel like you're talking to them. Simple as that. Now, it's one of those things where people say, understand your ideal client. It sounds obvious, but I have to pause you there because so many people end up essentially not understanding their audience, where they don't have that connection. And it's not necessarily understanding your audience in the sense of knowing what they have for breakfast or this kind of level of minutiae, but it's understanding their needs, their key pain points, where they're coming from, how they see the world, how they see their problem, and then how they probably take in your potential solution. So no wonder it's absolutely key, and no wonder it came up a whopping 87 times. That's massive.
Yeah. And for those who are not looking at the spreadsheet, I do have the episode number that it was in, so you can check this out and you can go and listen to those episodes. So we have the episodes in the spreadsheet, which will be linked in the show notes. You can actually see which episodes each of these pieces of advice was mentioned in. I did that in part because I wanted to be able to cross-validate what the AI was telling me, but it's useful to have so people can go check out, okay, I want to learn more about this particular topic. You can go listen to all the episodes on that if you want to. But yeah, so understanding your ideal client. So I think for me this comes from how I do this is I like to talk to people on calls, and I really like to record those calls. So I did this at the start. I did this as like Zoom interviews. So it was like a telephone interview, but I said, look, I want to pick your brain on this. I'm doing some research on this. And the way that I framed it was, my intention is to write a book about marketing to and the problems that people are facing in this area, and I would love to get in a call and just pick your brain about this. I don't have anything for sale. I'm basically just doing this like a telephone survey, and I just want to get to understand like the problems that you're facing and understand more about that. Now that's one way you can do it. Another way is you can literally just have conversations with your clients. And so your existing clients, you say, hey, you know, can we get in a call? And I just want to understand things from your perspective. So I just want you to tell me about the problem that you're facing and the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, and interview them in that way. And what you're doing is you're learning. And I know I'm using the word interview here because I think that that's effectively what you're doing here is you're not just talking to them for the sake of building a relationship. You're talking to them to learn.
It's very much what you call a discovery conversation. You're discovering.
Yeah, having this deep understanding of how they see this problem that they're facing and why it's important to them, and very specifically the language that they're using to describe it. And this is super important, like particularly from a marketing perspective and a sales perspective. The language that they're using, that's what you want to be using on your website. That's what you want to be repeating back to them. You want to take the language that they've used to describe the problem and just say, hey, if you're facing this and you feel like this, and you're repeating those words back to them, because you know that's the way they feel, that's the language they're using. So I think that's why this is really crucial. So A, you have this deep understanding of what they want and what they care about, and B, you're able to use that in your marketing as well. And all of that will help you to have a stronger relationship and connect better with people.
Absolutely. I mean, I just add to that when your aim is to build relationships, the fact that as I said, it was the fact that it was mentioned as an undercurrent so much was that you're moving from the transactional to something more, and that's when people aren't comparing you apples to apples. Suddenly you're apples to oranges, which is what you want. That's where you can justify the fees. You can justify various different things because you're not compared to people on a one-to-one basis. They see that there's something else there, that you're trying to build a relationship, that you have more what we used to call the fiduciary responsibility, that you're putting their interests and good health and well-being, personally and business-wise, ahead of your own economic interests is the key principle there. So it's non-transactional, which is absolutely key. Is there anything else you want to just quickly say about that? That's a great way to
summarize it. Non-transactional, yeah.
Is there anything else you want to say about that area before we move on to the next one?
The other supporting ones here are, one of them that came up very often is the advice to be authentic. So be yourself in your content, in the content that you're creating, and because people will see if you're trying to be someone that you're not, people will see that, and it's impossible to put on a show for 200 podcast episodes, for example. What I mean by that is it's impossible not to be yourself, and it makes it really difficult. It's very emotionally draining. So just accept that particularly if you're doing something like podcasting and video, you're going to just have to be yourself. And so I see people try to put on a level of sometimes professionalism that doesn't really fit them, and it looks like an ill-fitting suit, and people who are consuming that content, who are looking at it, will feel the inauthenticity, that they'll see that it's not really you. So I think that it's really important to just accept, okay, I'm gonna be who I am, and then people who like me are going to come and follow my stuff and listen to me or watch my stuff. And people who don't like me are going to be put off by that, but that's life,
That's life.
Accept that and be authentic, and you'll attract more people.
Absolutely. And as I said, it's just easier to be yourself. And the more differentiated you are, the more you stand out in that, dare I say the word, marketplace anyway. So that's exactly what you want. And it brings us neatly into the next section, which is all about that idea of what's the mindset, or what are you bringing to it. So professional development and mindset. And these numbers are a bit lower than some of the other sections, maybe because you didn't quite focus on it as much, or didn't quite come up, rather than they don't really believe in it. But it's absolutely that first of all, to take action.
And I think
just like you were saying earlier, this is what you were saying, is like, get started. Then you can improve while doing, right?
What happens is a lot of people say, I'll start when I'm ready. I'm not going to start until I'm ready. And the problem is either you never feel ready, or it becomes something where, you're chasing this feeling of ready, and you just don't, you don't ever get there. For me, it was with my podcast. I actually delayed creating my first podcast for 7 years because I wasn't ready. And actually, I did have some major problems in my business that the podcast uncovered, and that was why it was delayed by at least I'd say 2 or 3 years. But I probably could have started at that point, but I didn't feel ready, and I was waiting. So I think you just need to say, okay, there's only so much I can learn about learning to swim by reading a book. At some point, I've got to get into the water. And so that's what I'm saying here is you've got to take action and experiment. And I was talking to Chris Doe about this, and one of he's got 4 million followers on YouTube or whatever, and very, very smart guy. And he said, look, one of the great things about starting out and when you make mistakes when you're starting out is you have a small audience anyway. It's only later on, when you've got a larger audience, that you want to have those reps under your belt. You want to have made the mistakes with the smaller audience, so that when you have a bigger audience, that you're much better. So I think that's why
it's your learning curve in there, with the smaller group, and also, as you said, that they probably like you more because you're more. It's smaller scale. It's more at that level. But what I love here is invest in high quality audio and video. Sounds obvious, but it just makes the output itself that bit better. It makes it that bit more professional. Even if you're that little bit more casual or whatever, depending on how professional or casual you want.
Something that I've said quite a few times. So I was listening to the Marketing Book podcast with Douglas Burdett, and I'm very lucky to have been one of his guests on that show. But I've been listening to that show for a long, long time, and I know that he has a whole process where when he has an author coming on, he gives them information about which equipment to choose, and he referenced a study that was about the quality of audio and video and the impact it had. And when I saw this, I said, okay, I've got to talk to that professor. So I went and I dug up who the professor was, Professor Norbert Schwartz from the University of Southern California. And I interviewed him about this. And what he found in his study, and it's really interesting, I think it's episode 34 of the podcast, but what he found was that if you have better audio and video quality, you appear more professional, you appear smarter, and it appears that your work is more important. And if you have poorer audio or video, so your audio and video isn't as good, then you appear less professional, less competent, less intelligent, and your work is less important. So, like, which of those two things do you want? Do you want to sound more intelligent and more credible and like your work is important? Or do you want to sound less so? So I think this is just, like, this is table stakes for anybody who is an expert, is just get some decent audio equipment, some decent video equipment, set up some good lights. I've created loads of resources about this, actually. I've got a free book on Amazon that was published by Oak Tree Press. I have a video which shows, I did side-by-side comparisons of different microphones and things, and I have a whole free guide on equipment to use. So look, there's loads of information out there. There's loads of information from other people, including Douglas, and we spoke about this a bit. Actually, we had a little bit of a mini rant when I was on his podcast. We were talking about this, but I think this is just like, this is one of those things that you have entirely within your control. There's a lot of stuff that's outside of our control, but this is entirely within your control. So that's why I think it's crazy not to do this, You
also don't need to spend thousands. I mean, there's levels of this, isn't there? I mean, just getting decent podcasting equipment, for example, very affordable to anyone,
I mean, it depends on what your budget is, but there are high quality microphones at different price points, and I'll put a link in the show notes to the resources, because I have a ton of resources on this. I'll put a link to those, but you can spend from as little as $40, and that will give you a vast, a huge step up in quality.
I mean, I've had this little beauty recommended by a mutual friend of ours who's a voiceover artist, and basically said, what does he use? And then what's 80% is good and 10% of the price, and he recommended the Audio Technica ATR 2100, and it's like $100, $120, something like that, and it's fab. It's served me so well for a good few years now, and that's my point. You can get fancier stuff, $300-400, of course you can, but it can be $100 and you're set. So, other in the professional development mindset area, don't be afraid to fail. We kind of talked about that point from a different angle on investing in yourself, as we did with the point from a different angle on develop a repeatable process, just like you were saying with being able to have that core thing and spin it into different directions, so you get a much more magnitude effect of volume, that you seem to have a huge amount of content, yet it sprang from, as you said, that 2 hours a week essentially, which is incredible. Again, incredible return on investment for your time in, by just setting up that system effectively once, and then just having your VA or using AI, or you yourself using some of these tools, AI or otherwise, to just roll it out each week. So is there anything else you want to just say about the professional development mindset area, or shall we move on to the final category?
I think the last one that's mentioned here, be patient. I think that's important. Yes. So building authority takes time and consistent effort. Be patient and trust the process. Now, I think this is crucial, because it's one of these, like, this is the route that does not get you instant results. And that's the thing that I dislike the most about the process of building authority. It does take a huge amount of time, and you're going to go through this process. But what I'll say is, all of the things that happen along the way are really useful. So, for example, you're going to get better at writing content, at creating, at creating video and audio. If you go down that route, you're going to get better at doing that, and that's going to be that's going to stand to you. That's going to be really useful skill to have. But it's a bit like going to the gym. You're not going, like, if you go 7 days in a week, and at the end of that week you're not going to be have changed your life. But if you go once or twice a week for a year, for 2 years, that can be life changing. And so that's what we're talking about here. Is we're talking about this is measured in months and years, not days and weeks. It's the thing I like the least about building authority, but I think that it is something that is really worthwhile in doing, because all of the stuff that you learn along the way, the relationships that you build. So, for example, I chose to do podcasting as the primary method. So I've spoken to all these people. Rochelle Moulton, for example, wrote the foreword for my book, and that only came because I had her on the podcast, because I had Jonathan Stark on the podcast. I've spoken to Alan Weiss, who is the $1 million consultant. He never would have given me the time of day if I didn't have a podcast to invite him onto. I've spoken with people like Bob Berg.
Just to pause you a second there.
Yeah,
that's such a great point that is often missed here. Is that if you try and reach out to someone on LinkedIn, particularly who's crazy busy or niche, domain famous or something like this, where they're getting a lot of people asking them for things, and this is something that's largely overlooked. If you have a podcast, or maybe you're interviewing them for a book, for example, it's a totally different situation. You're offering, in a sense, to give them value. You're saying, hey, can I have would you like a platform in which I let you say what you want to say and get your differentiated views across to an audience, both to your own and to mine? Rather than, hey, can I have a chat, which most people high net worth go, hey, can I try and pick your brain for free instead of paying you, right? Or, hey, can I try and sell you stuff out of your busy schedule? Whereas it's an actual value add, right? This is the key thing. So it builds those relationships. It builds that initial rapport for potential future interactions, whether it's network, whether it's referrals, whatever it is. I know you're not pro referrals, but my point is the same: is that it opens all these doors to all these possibilities, because you're starting in an actual win-win, rather than saying, hey, can you give me free time, please? Is basically what you're normally asking. I think
the best LinkedIn connection message you can send is, would you like to be on my podcast? Or I'd like to have you on my podcast.
You seem interesting. I really like your stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe we'd be a good fit. Maybe you'd be a good fit. Would you like to be on my podcast, type of thing? Yeah. So let's crack on to the next. This is huge. This is 87 different speakers said this.
Yeah, so it's come up in at least 87 distinct episodes. So focus on value.
Focus on value. This is in the section of value and impact. So go for it. Talk to us about it.
So provide genuine value to your audience. And so this is, this is saying, this is like karma. You give value, and this will build trust and attract people who are your ideal clients. And so this is just about, creating good content and putting it out into the world. So trying to provide
just
genuine
from what we're
value.
saying, from the earlier point, works exactly in this as well, that you're approaching not going, give me things for free. You're saying, you give me value, I'll give you value. I'm giving you value, you give me value. It's value. Right?
Yeah.
So it's the same point.
I think this comes back to Cialdini's principle of reciprocation in his book Influence, which is kind of one of the top marketing psychology books or sales psychology books you can read. Reciprocation. If you give somebody value in the content that you're creating and putting out, and they find genuine value in that, they're going to want to talk to you. They're going to want to listen to you. They're going to want to sign up for your email list. They see the clear value that you have. And by the way, this is one of those standout. This is one of those major ones that's come up time after time after time. So it's come up in at least 87 episodes that this is super important. So the whole, if you're thinking about this, what the conversation that we're having here, we're talking about creating content on a consistent basis in order to develop your reputation and build your authority in a specific niche. And in there, you're going to start off by creating content, and it mightn't be so great at the start, but you're going to get better and better and better. But you're always focused on giving value to people in the content, and that's super important. And like that's one of the things, you know, that like one of the reasons why I'm quite picky about the people. Like I've 170 odd episodes of this podcast, but I'm actually really picky about the guests who I have on, to the point that I don't even read the emails that come in that are pitching guests to me. So I've never taken a guest from one of those people pitching guests to me. I have a filter set up on my email, so every email, and this by the way might be interesting for people who are trying to guest on podcasts. I don't. I just filter all of those away, so I don't ever even see them. And so that's because I'm genuinely trying to provide value to the listener. That is super important to me, and it's something I always say to all of my podcast guests. The most important thing here is that we provide value to the person who's listening to this, and that's why at the start of all of my episodes, when I'm talking to guests, I don't go into their backstory. I almost never, and I think I've done it once or twice maybe because it's been really relevant to the episode. But for the most part, on all of those episodes, we go straight into the topic, and that's because I want to focus on value, and I genuinely want to give value to the people who are listening to this, and so I think that bleeds through when people see that in your content. I think that they appreciate that, and that builds trust, and that attracts people. So that's why I think that's really important. Everything else in here, by the way, is kind of in support of that. Like having a call to action. That's just, like you want to tell people, here's the next step. That's just giving them a next step to follow.
Exactly.
Focusing on outcomes. That's focusing on the outcomes again. That's focusing on value. So what are the outcomes and transformations that people care about? And
just
then,
a quick thought on that. Going back to the focusing on value, people often still fall into this trap where they talk about something when in actual terms it's a feature, rather than clarifying the value of that feature. So here's my perspective. It's like, and thinking that's obvious, but it's when you're primed in your mindset thinking, well, what's the value for the listener? What's the value for the audience? Then it's like, that means that you avoid this trap, or that means you have this huge benefit that you're able to apply in this sort of way. And when you have that thinking, it is much more obvious to the audience the value that you're bringing.
Yeah. It's answering the question,
assumed.
So what?
Exactly.
Which is kind of irritating. But if you ask the question, so what, 3 times in a row after talking about what you're doing, that will help you to clarify what you're doing.
Definitely.
It'll help you to figure out why that's important. Like, why is this truly important to the person who is listening to me, and that will really help. It'll help your sales conversations. It'll help your marketing copy on your website. It'll help your content that you're creating, because when you're always thinking in terms of so what, why is this important, then
exactly. So what does that get me? Says your audience.
Yeah.
And you need to be answering
like the other thing, and the way I think about this is everybody is listening to WeFM. So everybody on this call, everybody at this webinar, everybody at this talk, everybody listening to this podcast, everybody watching this video, wherever they're consuming something or looking at your website, they're listening to WeFM. WeFM is what's in it for me. So they're looking at or listening to you, or looking at your words, thinking in their mind, what's in it for me from this? And so they're processing, because ultimately, like, that's the way we think. That's the way it, probably goes back to our reptilian brain or something, but we're always thinking about, how does this apply to me in my situation? And so we need to address that in the content that we're creating. We need to address it specifically.
Very good. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss there, or should we go into the overview now, just to talk about maybe some
I just want to mention the very last point that I have on here, and it's got a little bit less than some of the other ones, but it is something that comes up over and over again, is raise your prices. You probably can double your prices right now. Probably can. And it's one piece of advice that I hear over and over from people who are involved in pricing, and what it'll do is it'll automatically lose your worst customers. the kind of the people who are providing the least value to you, and you're probably providing the least value to them because you're not charging them enough to give as good a service as you could. What will happen is you'll have more free time to work on working with your better clients. And so raising your prices is almost never a bad thing, and most people who are listening to this can probably double their prices right now. So, and that's something that I've heard from a lot of people who are, people like Jonathan Stark and people just
Christo's a big fan of that too. Yeah,
so
everybody is.
I've got a list of the episodes there. I can't remember all the people specifically, but I've heard this over and over again from people who are involved in pricing. It's just something that you can do. So I think you should do that. Is look at your prices and seriously consider raising them. And there's the old phrase of if I double my price, I'll lose half my clients. Oh my God, yeah, absolutely, that's great. So that's exactly what we want.
We get more time back because better clients.
Because people ask me, how do you have time to create content? Well, you have to make the time to create content. So this is one of those ways of making that time. So okay, let's move to. We're just going to talk about what are the top 5 pieces of advice that come up over and over again. So let's start from 5 and go to 1. Yeah.
Yeah. So this came up. 65 speakers said to specialize in niche down, which we touched on earlier.
Yeah, and this is something I really believe in. You cannot be you can't be an expert in everything, and I think until for people who are generalists out there, I think that the fears around specialization, and I created a whole podcast about this called the Specialization Podcast, but the fears around specialization are, I'm going to be bored. What if I pick the wrong thing? Are there enough clients out there? If you niche down properly, there's almost certainly enough clients. You almost certainly won't get bored. The more you dig into a topic, it gets really interesting. It gets more interesting the deeper you go, and you're almost certainly not going to be bored. And if you pick the wrong thing, that's okay. Just pick something else. Test it and see. And if it's not working for you, then change. I've spoken to quite a few people who've done that. Sarah Dunn, for example, was in one of the first episodes of the podcast, and she niched down into something that wasn't working for her, and so she just changed. So I think she was originally doing Google AdWords for chiropractors, and she figured out that she didn't like doing Google Ads, and she didn't like working with that market, and so she ended up specializing in search engine optimization for wedding planners, and now she's the top person in the world in that niche, and she loves who she works with, and it's very you can see how specific that is, but it's still a huge market, so that's just one example. Definitely. So I think specializing, niching down, absolutely, I think it's super important.
So the next one, with 87, joint fourth. We could even talk about them together, could we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Focusing on value, and equal to it was understanding your ideal client. We talked about the focusing on the value there at length a minute ago. And understanding your ideal client, we also talked. Is there any other further thoughts that you want to express on that?
I think it comes up in another section, but just on understanding your ideal client, doing research. So actually doing a survey or something like that can be a really useful way of gathering information, and it can also be useful in building a list. It can be useful in in a lot of different ways, in building relationships as well. But doing some small scale research, my business coach Philip Morgan encouraged me to do that, and it was really helpful. So I
have to agree. I mean, before I did my program, my book, the whole lot, I asked a whole lot of my current and prospective clients, and you will know a lot of it, but what's particularly interesting I found is the hierarchy for an awful lot of people of what they deemed important. Very much changed in my view. That was enlightening. As were the fears. When you get into what they actually fear, that was a huge eye-opener. Because one of my client base is a quick example, creative entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs who work in creative industries. And one of their they had 2 huge fears that kept coming up. One, dialing in mediocre work. That was a huge fear, which I loved and admired them for that one. And the second was that they'd have to let good people go if they made a mess of projects or a mess of client work. You know, if there was a
Wow.
downturn,
Right.
they'd have to let good people go. So very
Yeah.
humane, both of them, and
Hmm.
admirable, you know. But those
Hmm.
are insights I didn't have before, and then when I'm talking to people in those areas, I can touch on those points. It's very important.
And now that will make a connection with them because they know that you truly understand what they care
Absolutely.
about and what's going on in their head. Yeah.
I can even reference it where people have said, "Yeah, no, that is kind of a thing, actually." Yeah. So they, you know, even though they mightn't say it immediately, when you say this is something that came up in my conversations, you know, being that blatant about it, they can literally go, "Oh yeah, yeah, no, definitely." As you said, so it builds that relationship. It's one of the questions I would suggest that it's one of the areas where when you're doing it, are you building a bridge to that person, or are you actually going further and further apart? Because when
Hmm.
you're saying things that don't matter to them, they're going, "Oh, this person doesn't get me. Oh, this person doesn't get me." If you're saying things that are, they're going, "Oh yeah, we're on the same page, we're on the same wavelength." All of those sort of metaphors, and it's a lot easier to move ahead and trust. So if they trust you, you say something else, they're like, "Oh yeah, this person gets me, this person gets me." When you then say something that's slightly different or a request of them, they're far more likely, because of that built up rapport, built up trust, even if it's just one directional, that they'll say, "Yeah, I'll take that step. I'll book that call. It's only a small call, but I'll book that thing, or I'll get that freebie, or I'll whatever the next step is." So hugely important stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And like the reason why we're in professional services is to help people and and to create value for ourselves by helping other people by creating value for them. Like that's why we're doing this. So I think it's super
That's how
important
we're
to
doing it.
understand the people that we're working with. So yeah. Okay, next
So,
one.
yeah, the
These are the
last, the
top two,
last,
and these are the top two pieces of information of
mm,
advice that come up consistently. Consistently.
89 and 90. Now, this is
Yeah.
huge. Build
And
authority and
again, the
create
numbers that
content
we're talking about
consistently.
here, the numbers that we're
Mm,
talking about here are the number of episodes that this has come up as advice in. And
mm-hmm.
so we're talking about, well over 50% of all episodes of this podcast, the guest has spoken about the importance of doing this. And so in this case, it's building authority and creating content consistently. And I think that those two go together because you're building authority by creating content consistently. And we've spoken about this almost ad nauseum, but I just want to re-emphasize how important this is. Like this is the crux of the whole thing. We're building
Definitely.
authority because you want to establish yourself as the go-to person in your niche, and what that's going to do is that's going to allow you to never have to work with a bad fit client. It's going to allow you to have more free time. It's going to allow you to increase your prices, which frees up more of your time. And it's going to also allow you to do things like it allows you to do sales and marketing in a different way, which is what I'm really interested in. Because for me, marketing is about getting on a call with somebody like Al here and having a conversation and then repackaging that up as a podcast. And,
Definitely.
that's my sales and marketing. And I really love that because I'm an introvert and I don't really like the networking aspect of, because the alternative here to building authority is to go and do lots of networking and have a referral based business, which like has its place and has its value.
Mm.
But I think for me, this is the next step up is to build authority and have people coming inbound to you so you don't have to go out and do all that networking.
And that's a key point, is that warmth of the inbound. Because they're not just inbound, they're inbound so that they like you.
Yeah.
They're
They feel like
inbound so
they
there's
already know you.
even to a small degree that you can build on, but they're half sold or they're a quarter way sold. Not to use, not sorry to use that terminology. But the point is, they're far more than you approaching them. Which most networking events basically it's people chatting to people and everyone's hoping to sell something. Nobody's going there to buy anything,
Hmm. Yeah.
in person or virtually. This is the other way around. People approaching you, which is what everybody dreams of at networking events. This is
Yeah.
how you're
Yeah.
actually doing that at scale.
Yeah. And so
Right.
you're putting valuable, useful information out into the world. People are encountering that in some way, and they're saying, I've got to work with this person. This is the person who can solve our problem. Let's bring them in, get them involved. That's what we want to do here.
Very good.
I think that is a wrap for this episode. Is there anything else that you think we should talk about here, Al?
No, I think we covered all the bases for this one.
Awesome. So the top 5 pieces of advice: create content consistently, build authority, understand your ideal client, focus on value, and specialize in niche down. Those are the top 5 insights from well over 150. I think it's 162 episodes that I processed for this. And those are from, all of these super smart people. This isn't all just from me. This is from some of best-selling authors, thought leaders, all of these really, really great people. And this is kind of the distillation of all of that. That's why I think this is important. The whole spreadsheet is going to be available in the show notes. You can download and read through that. And I've pulled out a couple of things. There's a list of all of the episodes, the episode numbers that it's referred to, and I have some information in the show notes on how you can actually find and listen to every one of those episodes individually. So I think this is a great starting point. If you want to learn how to build authority, and you want to build authority, and you want to know what's important about that, this is a great place to start with this.
Great stuff.
Al, that's a wrap.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming on and chatting with me about this.
Thanks for having me. It's been fascinating. Cheers.